If you haven't watched the first couple of videos, the first one covers just an introduction into the app, so go and look for that. The second one looks at the ASISA categories, and then the third and fourth is part one and part two, where we're looking at a particular fund. We're looking at the information tab for that fund, and I'm going to go back into it and continue where we left off. So we've been looking at the multi-manager balance fund, the standard multi-manager balance fund. And in part one, I covered the general fund info here. In part two, I covered the asset allocation, and then all the way down to, we've covered these charts, the rolling return charts. So now let's have a look at a few more. Okay, here we got calendar year returns. So it's the equivalent of looking at this chart here if you had to pull out each number at 31 December. Okay, so it's, the 12-month rolling number specifically at 31 December, so at each of those lines. That's what the calendar year return is going to give you. But it's going to give it to you for the fund. Apologies. It's going to give it to you for the fund in white. The benchmarks, in this case, I've left it as the ASISA category average. So the benchmark in yellow, and the alpha or the outperformance. If it outperforms, it's green. If it underperforms, it's red. So you can see every calendar year here with legends, etc. And you can see that we've got 20 years of data. So pretty much this first year, 2003, would actually only be 11 months, and 2023 would only be the month of January, so a single month. Okay. Another way to look at this data would be to look at the returns to date. Okay. In other words, 1 month, 3 month, all to the end of January. Okay, so you've got this endpoint bias that I often speak about, or end date bias within the numbers. You can also add a hurdle rate, but you need to be careful. This hurdle might not be added to every single charger. But, if you just scroll that, you can see, versus the category average, outperforming by 3.5, it would underperform. Whereas outperforming by -1%, it would outperform. The reason we put this in here is for things like CPI. If you wanted to check how's this fund performed against CPI, but I don't just want it to beat CPI. This fund actually targets CPI plus about 5% net of fees, and the fund that we're looking at here is net of fees, or the fee class we're looking at. You can see here I can crank 5% on top of CPI, and now you can see, look, in most years it's outperformed clearly, or sorry, not in most calendar years. In this case, you'd have to come up here and see that it's actually outperformed in most calendar years, but it also underperforms in a couple. So out of the 21, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, might have underperformed the ASISA category. So I'm just going to put that back to 0 so it doesn't affect anything else. And you might have seen by clicking on here, I can actually I've got a table of all the individual monthly returns. Okay, so all the way back to 2003, as I said, we've only got 11 months because I've got 20 years of data exactly. So when I add January 2023, I drop January 2003. So you've got all the individual months, green numbers positive, red numbers negative, as well as for the full calendar year here on the right. And these again are nominal returns, so what the fund actually earned on a time-weighted basis versus active returns. How did the fund do against the benchmark, and not the fund's benchmark? Okay, it could be the fund's benchmark, but whatever benchmark you've chosen in this app here. So in this case, this is a category average. Okay, we've then got a histogram of all the returns. So out of those 240 returns, can you draw a histogram of how they were distributed? So the worst return, being worse than -10, the best return being better than +10, and you can see a distribution here with the mean and 1, 2, and 3 standard deviations each side. Now remember, standard deviation doesn't tell you it follows a normal distribution. Every distribution has a standard deviation. It's just giving you a measure of the spread of the returns around the mean return. Okay, and you can see the mean return is positive, probably in the region of about 1%. A return funnel, which really is just taking every single month and looking for the best return and the worst return. Then every 2 months, every 3 months, every 4 months, all the way out to 20 years. Okay, so every year, every 2 years, 3 years, all the way out to 20 years. And obviously at 20 years, we've only got one data point because we've only got 20 years of data. So there isn't a maximum and a minimum. The two are the same. Whereas if you have to go to 10 years, the worst 10 years versus the best 10 years, you can pull out those numbers. So to get an idea, for example, that there's probably, for a negative return, there's probably no period shorter than 3 years for which you would have had a negative return. Okay, there or thereabouts. Okay, here we've got the quartile ranking of the fund and the benchmark. And I think there's potentially a problem here with the benchmark. This doesn't look right unless the benchmark has been chosen to be something funny. It's the CISA category average, so I've got to have a look at that as well. But essentially it's the quartile ranking, and you can see the dark red being fourth quartile. It's difficult to see in this graph. I wanted to do the nominal graph anyway, but rather let's go down to the active graph. It doesn't look much better here. Let's just take a longer period. I'm going to have to check this out because potentially there's a problem with this as well. Okay, so let's move on, and then we've got the risk return plot. Just choose a period, so over 36 months, for example. You've got every single fund in that CISA category with the average return, the average volatility, and then this fund, the Standard Multi-Manager Balance Fund, as the white dot there. Okay, and this would be in nominal terms again, and in active terms, so active return versus the tracking risk. And then maybe just one or two more graphs here. This one is the upside downside capture. So let me just explain what downside capture is and what upside capture is. So downside capture, if the benchmark goes down in a particular month, record that fund's return over that month and the benchmark return over that month, and then accumulate all of those by doing the cumulative product, compounding, accumulate all the benchmark negative returns, okay, and all the fund's returns in the same months that the benchmark was down. Okay, that's important. It's not the months that the fund was down, it's the months that the benchmark was down. Take the fund's return and express the fund's return as a ratio to the benchmark's return. That's a downside capture ratio. Same for the upside, except using up months. So what you want, if a fund captured the same amount of upside and downside, in other words, it had the same sensitivity to markets going up or down, or the benchmark in particular going up or down, that would be a fund that's sort of invested in the market and not doing much of anything. But being above the line here means you're capturing more of the upside than of the downside. Okay, now it doesn't. You can be above the line and above 100%. In other words, you capture more of the upside and more of the downside, but you're capturing the ratio of upside to downside is greater than 1. Okay, but you can also be below 100%. Okay, it just means you're capturing more of the upside than you are of the downside on a relative basis. Okay, let's have a look at the cumulative chart. So this explains why this is not looking right. This is the benchmark is showing a CPI. I don't think it's changed this to the CISA category average. I think that's the problem. Yeah, doesn't seem to be moving there. Let's just go back to these. Okay, that looks a lot better. Okay, so this, I'm using the median here. You can see that again, and this looks a lot better. So the median's that orange line. The funds sometimes outperforming the median, sometimes below the median, sometimes in the fourth quartile, sometimes in the third quartile, sometimes in the second, and the dark green is when it's in the first quartile. So obviously, clearly, recently, been performing very well. And you can change the period when that's over rolling 60 months, 5 years. This would be over rolling 3-year basis. You can see it spent some time in the beginning in the top quartile, some time in the bottom quartile, and more recently in the top quartile. Okay, so we've had a look at the upside downside capture. Now this is the cumulative return, and I often ask that this be done on a log scale, so that's why I've got logarithmic chosen here for the scale, because any compounding process or exponential process, you're going to lose, the sort of the global financial crisis in this case, you're going to lose the proportionate change in the value of the fund if you've got it on a linear scale, whereas the log scale will make that as pronounced as it should be. In other words, the market going down during COVID is in proportion to what the market went down during the global financial crisis. You can also have a look at it on a relative basis. So this would be the funds outperforming the benchmark, underperforming the benchmark, outperforming the benchmark. Okay, so just on a relative basis. And then you've got the drawdowns, the drawdown chart. So again, you can look at this by comparing the fund to the benchmark. Drew down worse than the benchmark in this case, but you can also do that on a relative basis, which shows you underperformance of the benchmark. It was significant here during the global financial crisis, and since then it's actually tracked back all of that underperformance. In other words, from this point it would have outperformed the benchmark all the way to there, like we saw up here. It's outperforming the benchmark, but it was really just recovering from its previous underperformance. So from that high point where it outperformed the benchmark, it then went and underperformed the benchmark. That's reflected here. And again, this is not necessarily the fund's benchmark, it's whatever benchmark you've selected to do the comparison with. And then finally, maybe just here would be those metrics related to this, like the maximum drawdown of 27%, which you'll see on this basis. 27% drawdown there. The drawdown period was 16 months and the recovery period was 19 months. Okay, so 16 months to the drawdown, 19 months to the recovery. And the next video, part 4, we'll have a look at regression metrics. We'll carry on from here. Thanks, bye.